Your genius. Hey, thank you, sir. All right, bye. Jeff, we are good to go whenever you are, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay, the time is 6:05, and we call this P and Z meeting to order on May 4th, 2021. Are there any visitors or citizens that are scheduled to speak before we start the agenda?
We do not have anyone outside of Mr. Elliott who will be here for item number 3.
Okay, great. And we appreciate Mr. Elliott being here. Try to move this right along. Okay, number 1 item on the agenda is consideration and possible action regarding the regular meeting minutes of the April 6th, 2021 meeting. Does everybody have time to look through the minutes?
Yeah, I move to adopt the meeting minutes from April 6th, 2021 as is. A second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it.
Tell me who
No
seconded
opposition.
that, I'm sorry.
It was a joint second, I think, Miriam McCary.
Mary Morphew?
You know
I
which
did.
one?
Ah, Allison, gotcha.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you for the record. All right. Meeting minutes passed. Item number 2 on the agenda, consideration and possible action regarding recent exterior painting for the Southern Roots Salon at 14275 Liberty Street in the Historic Preservation District.
Members of the commission, you've got in your packet the cover sheet and some photos of the building there with a brief description that I have received from the applicant. They knew the meeting was tonight. They had indicated that they would be here, but they didn't. I don't see them. They didn't make it. So, as you know, the Historic Preservation District ordinance does require all exterior modifications to be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and these guys said that they did not, know that they had to do that. And the information that you see in front of you is what they've asked to have acted on by the commission. I did put from the design guidelines an excerpt of kind of where it speaks to color. Again, there's a lot of latitude there. No metallic colors or fluorescent colors. Those are the only ones that they say absolutely no to. You've got the discretion to decide what conforms both with the site itself and with the, with the district, as a whole, to determine whether or not you approve or deny this. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I've seen it being reconstructed, and it went from, the white to the black.
Forgive me, I'm just going to start this microphone.
We're just getting back in swing it.
It was gutted, and it was pretty bad after the freeze, and they did a meticulous job of really, I watched them almost every day, but I did not see them paint it black. I mean, it happened that quickly. Aesthetically, moving through the town, it's stark because I've seen it white for so long. So that's my only, I was like, wow, who said they could paint it black? I'm not saying it's ugly or whatever, but it is different from what it was before. And in the notes, it says something that they were bringing it back to a primary color from the Masonic history. I noticed that it said that it was previously the Masonic Lodge, which is that in reference to the Masonic Lodge that is behind A&A Plants now? Or is that a historical building, or is that a historical spot where the Masonic Lodge was?
I'm not clear on whether or not it's the site or the building. I know the Historical Society owns the ground.
Because I don't remember.
I don't believe they own the building. I don't know that for sure. I don't, again, I just wasn't involved enough to know what, transpired to get that building on that site. But my understanding is the Historical Society owns the lot itself. So my sense would be, it would be the site is, perhaps the historical aspect of it, or when they reference the Masonic Lodge, my thinking is it's not the building itself, because the building just doesn't look of the, of the age or size that a Masonic Lodge, would be. But, the site, perhaps that's why the Historical Society owns it, is because it was the site of a Masonic Lodge.
So as it stands now, the question is just the color, because it fits all the other criteria from what I can see from the list that you gave us.
Right.
It's just the color. And they are going to build the porch on the back, which they will bring to the city if they need to, for the building permits or anything, if that's required. It has nothing to do with planning and zoning.
Right. It's a yes if they're building the porch exactly the way that it was, it wouldn't come back to the P&Z for approval. They're just, rebuilding the porch. But if they're going to build a larger porch, which again, my understanding of it was, just a landing. They're building a building code, required, landing there for the porch to be able to get out, but they're not building kind of a deck, if you will. That's a large kind of gathering area off the back. Again, I don't have the specifics on it to know, but that's the way that at least I took it when he was describing it. So,
Because I mean, the front porch is different, rocks are gone, now it's wood. We know it's the owner that's going to have to do the upkeep and all that, but the color did change, and also the porch, the rocks were removed. So it falls within the criteria of what it's supposed to. It's not the colors that they listed on there that it's not supposed to be. It's just they did it without knowing.
right.
So they want us to approve black. Is that what they're asking us? They want us to approve the black?
That's what they're asking me for.
I don't see the black is in keeping with any of the buildings elsewhere in downtown. It's my understanding that their daughter may be affiliated with the historical, in the Montgomery area business, historical business.
HMBA.
Yes. And so I would imagine they've been here for 7 years as a business, having this at this location. And I would think that they would be fairly aware that they would probably need as a business and going to spend the expense of paint, that they would check. I'm an insurance adjuster by profession. I understand what they went through because of the restoration process, and as a business owner myself in the past. But before I would expend the money to repaint the exterior of my business, I would check in a historical district. I would check to be sure, so that I didn't have to go back and re-spend those dollars. But it looks like they did a fabulous job of updating the building. I checked the Montgomery County Appraisal District to find out that the building was built in, I believe it was 2000, 2001. So in doing my due diligence, I weighed what I see, and I have questions about what they intend to do with the trim, such as the post and the deck. And I'm not leaning towards, I'm not in favor. I don't have any problem with black. It's a popping color, obviously, but I don't think it's in keeping with the consideration that the adjacent businesses have to go through. They've all asked, and they've all gone to the effort of clearing signs and paint and all of that in advance. So I have some reservations about approving that request, and I'm disappointed. I was hoping that they'd be here so that I could hear you know, their needs and what their positions are on that. So I regret that they're not here.
Right, absolutely. And as one option, you can obviously, either approve or deny it. You can also table it and, until next month and say, well, if you're not here next month, we're going to act on it, regardless. But again, that's, just giving you options, but certainly I'll take whatever direction.
They did reverse is what it looks like they did, is the trim was black. The door at one time was pink. I don't remember the last color of the door. Actually, I went in there actually before the freeze, and the rails are gone from the previous way and the stones. We just met about the Mercantile that was asking, for their color, and we were being very specific, what color, can you be specific with the color? And they did their due diligence as well. What we want to prevent is someone coming in the downtown area and doing what they want to and then asking for forgiveness later. It's not the color issue, although that wouldn't have been my choice because it looks very popping as white as well. But it would be nice if they were here to give us the reasoning behind the color and what they want to do moving forward. Because it looks, did you say unfinished? The steps, based on what they've done in the past. You understand what I'm saying? Like they went to the detail before. So is this the finished product?
Well, in the end, if they came back, black is not wrong.
That's right.
So we still have to accept black.
Yes.
So I'm not sure what holding them off will help.
It's, while the ordinance says, no fluorescent or no metallic colors will be considered, it doesn't mean that you have to approve any other color. You do have the discretion to say, this is an acceptable color, but not here. I would urge you to have a good backup for why, but you don't, but just because it's not a specifically listed color as one that you can't use, it doesn't mean that you don't have the latitude to either say yes or no to a color, even if it's on. Again, there's really not an approved list of colors. There's only these two categories of colors don't work, fluorescent or metallic. But because all of these other colors exist doesn't mean that you have to approve any one of those for any, one specific building. You've got the discretion to choose.
Design guidelines do say, though, that the colors of the structure must be complementary to each other and the overall character of the historical district.
Right.
Some of the oldest buildings in this town are right across the street from this black building, and they are not black.
But is it saying in relation to each other, or the colors in relation to trim, to the main body of the house, to the porch?
Whatever the color is, they need to complement each other. You all bring up some good points, and I think the only time that, looking back just to the brief history, we've had an issue with a very pink building at one time, and things were really out there. Personally, I would like to, from the business standpoint, for them to draw business in my mind, my first reaction was just, do the post like Allison mentioned. The post could be white, and that's trim, and the balustrades and the railings white, and then the steps maybe dark. It's kind of it's funny about history. We talk about the historic district. I can shed a little bit of light on that, Masonic. But I grew up in a house until I was 12 years old that was built in the 1700s up in a little New England town, Hanover, Massachusetts. My mother was from Plymouth. I've seen all those old houses and lived in them. Most of them were either white clapboard or they were real dark stain, because that's what they used back then. Life was pretty simple. And they didn't So in my mind, historically, this reminds me of some of the really old houses. Now, granted, it doesn't match the one down the street. But I don't know, I could go, to me, if it had white trim on the posts and the railings, and whatever else, we could finish off those steps somehow. They've done a really nice job on the, the middle skirting on the bottom. And the other point here is we want to send a message that you get approval first. So in regard to that, yes, we need to, this happened before, we need to somehow send that message. But I guess the big question is, do you really make it do it? But also, maybe they could work with us. Personally, I think it looks great if it has some more white trim on it. And I don't have a problem with black. That's kind of a personal thing, though. So that's just me.
And the gutters are black. So if we fall into this and say, no, I mean, that's a lot of money. I
don't see any gutters. Are there
I
gutters?
think,
on
aren't
there
those the gutters on the front? That's what I was blowing up to see if they're gutters. Or is that just the
I think it's
facing
just-
of the
I
porch?
think it's just the trim.
Is
that?
it?
I think it's just the trim.
I seen that square on the end. I thought it was a gutter gap. Okay.
I've spoken to several business owners downtown and they were all shocked that, about painting it and then asking permission or begging forgiveness or whatever.
Right. That's not
because-
right.
Yeah, because they've all had to go through their own approval process and, design expense and everything to bring it, within
That's
the-
true.
within the design guidelines of being complementary to the overall character of the historical district itself. So,
If they had brought this to us, could we have said no?
Yes,
Yep, absolutely.
we can say no now.
yes.
Yep.
And is the 10 okay on the bottom? I looked at that earlier and I was like, it complements it, but is the
Right.
10
Well,
on the bottom?
let me put it this way. When I said that it's a good look, to me, y'all have to keep in mind, all kinds of building materials come out,
Yeah.
and some are better now than they were years ago. And, you look around the whole city, and there we have what I like to call an eclectic mix. But I think that's good. I embrace that. I like the old and I like the new. And we do, no matter how you slice it, we have a mix. We've got a lot of stuff that was built in the 60s. We had a lot of stuff that was really poorly built and it's been torn down. So as long as you've got a building material that looks like it's going to hold up well, I guess what I'm saying is a little character, individuality, that's why we moved here. We don't want cookie cutter. We don't want track. We like things where you've got a lot of variety. And to me, if this just had the right trim on it, so somebody might not like it personally. But,
Looking at the building, the colors, I like it. I think it looks sharp. From a business standpoint, I don't know if it's necessarily attractive, like that's going to jump out at, the eye, but I think it's a nice looking building on its own. I don't find it offensive in any way. I think the bigger issue is kind of an admonishment a little bit, for asking, forgiveness rather than permission. There has been quite a few now properties that have done that kind of same thing. And I do think that's a bad precedent to send, but at the same time, I certainly would have approved it had it come before. I just want to make sure that what we're approving is the final product, not that they're going to add a stain or an additional color.
I agree.
I'd like to move that we put this on hold and give them an opportunity to come speak before us and answer our questions so that we have more information to make a decision. And so that, to be honest, send a message that, if you want approval and you want consideration, number one, come before us and talk to us about it. And number two, follow follow the guidelines, the design guidelines for, residential and commercial structures in a historical district. So, when they bought, I guess, I don't know how long they've owned the property, but I think 7 years is what I was told. Was the historical district in place then?
It was.
Exactly.
It-
So-
And just as a point to note, on their sign that says Southern Roots, right above their name, it says historical.
Historical,
district.
that's right.
So they're
So-
quite aware of where they are.
Exactly. So, anyway, I moved and
So you move to table
I
until,
moved to table it and give them an opportunity, to come address this with us.
I second that.
Is there something that is set up in our city for, asking for forgiveness after they do it? Or they just get to do it and then it comes before us and we have to make the uncomfortable decision of paint it another color or tear it down?
And
or
then we
redo
decide
it?
if we want to go have our hair done there or not afterwards.
yeah, unfortunately, there's not,
Is there normally in other cities?
that's a question I don't know the answer to. I know on the building code side, the International Building Code does set out if you start work without a permit, the permit fee is doubled, or inspection fees are doubled. And so those types of things are in there, but for planning and zoning approval, there's not any kind of a punitive if
So
you're
maybe a
doing it,
fine.
you would probably travel down the code enforcement route, but that's certainly an option. You could, look to code enforcement, as a way to say, and perhaps the thing to do is, if we had a very active, code enforcement program, in the city, it's, this is a warning, it's not an actual citation. If you don't show up at the meeting for planning and zoning when this item is heard, then you will be issued a citation. I'm, speaking off the cuff, I don't know if that's a legal thing to do or
Well,
not. but it would-
As a business owner, if your exterior of your building and your signage is a big presence in the community, and being that they are, wanting to reopen after a disaster like this and the amount of money that they've been out in terms of lost revenue, I would think that they want to be here. So I would hope that they're okay and it's not an emergency that they couldn't be here, whatever. But that's why I'm asking, that maybe let's give them a chance. I'm not in favor of what they've done at all, but as a business owner and somebody who's self-employed, I want to give them the opportunity to be heard before I decide against their black paint.
Yeah, and let me just, before we wrap it up on that, just add on that. Typically what we've seen sometimes when these things have happened, like with Hodgepodge Lodge, they didn't get approval on that basket fence. It was a situation where they had a lot going on and there was some disagreements. I don't know all the detail. I'm not saying it's right, and I think y'all are very accurate about need to send a message. And I do wish they would hear. But I guess I'm just taking the side of a little compassion all the way through the freeze. And, they were they had water damage, they were trying to get it done. It's not an excuse, but I just feel like some of these times it's happened when they did something. There was a lot going on, and that worked out fine. Everybody talked after the Hodgepodge deal, and we all agreed it's fine. There's some good questions to ask you, but I do agree we need to send a message about approval.
The exterior didn't look to have been damaged. I'm no offense, but I seen it.
No, they had a lot of water.
The inside, yes. I seen them tear everything out of its walls.
And again, we don't know all of it, but again, my gut feeling is, as a business, you need to do something with that trim, you need to post the railings,
They may not be done yet.
so maybe.
We need to
don't
see a
know.
final product.
That's why we need them to come
Right.
talk to us.
Exactly. Right.
So, and that's why we need to not make up our minds until they have had the opportunity, and maybe there's something that's prohibiting them from being able to be here tonight. So,
Yes, because they did say they were gonna be here, you would.
He did confirm with me last week, said, yep, we'll plan on being there. And I sent him again an email yesterday, but I didn't hear back from him.
Yeah.
So, And just as a reminder, you do have a motion in a second.
Okay, okay, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. The ayes have it. Okay. Okay, item number 3 on the agenda, consideration and possible action regarding a proposed wood privacy fence at 825 College Street in the Historic Preservation District.
Members of the commission, you have in front of you this information. The owner is here tonight. Again, we tabled this with the idea that we were going to get a little more clarification since we know the property. I won't go over that again, but we'll just open up the floor to you guys. This is Mr. Justin Elliott. Recently, he was the grandson of the owners who's now purchased the property from his grandparents. So I'm talking to him as the owner. So feel free to ask any questions of either myself or Justin. We'll be happy to answer.
Do you live there?
No, ma'am. I am planning on moving there within the next month or two.
Oh, okay. And in terms of the, do you plan on hiring a company to put the fence in? Or? Okay. And in terms of the front, I guess there's animals in the backyard, right, that are pinned up?
So currently, yes.
Okay.
And obviously they're not living there, so I would live in there. And I've got 3 kids and we've got,
Okay.
So that's the reason behind the fences.
That's what I was wondering is, you know, if it was meant to hold animals in or, you know, livestock, or if it was meant for family, you know, kids and
So
dogs
the
and
kids can
stuff.
play in the backyard. I mean, it's a large property.
Yeah.
You know, a little acre. So, you know, I'd like to feel safe with the kids running in the backyard.
And what do you intend to do across the front? Are you gonna do a picket or an architectural or a wood fence? What are your intentions across the front?
I was originally asking for an 8-foot fence on the sides, but doing my research, that's not needed. A 6-foot fence is plenty. So I was just wanting to do like a 6-foot privacy fence. The back section of the property is already fenced with a privacy fence, and then in this spot, you're looking at it, the side to the left of the house is currently heavily wooded, but there's also a privacy fence that was there at the point. Some of it's fallen down and stuff like that. And then on the other side, it's got kind of like a wire fence now. So obviously, you know, I want to put the privacy fence there, and then in the front was thinking the same thing. And I could also, if it helps, put it further in the back of the house.
I don't know of any other houses that have privacy fences in the front, with the exception of maybe one, and it's just one short run to kind of block the porch, you know, from view. But have you gotten agreement from either neighbor on either side, or to share the cost, or are you bearing the entire cost?
I'll do it all. I know the neighbors to the left a few years ago, you know, we were talking about going on that and stuff. Didn't do it at that time. So now.
And are your neighbors in favor of it?
So the house on the right is actually vacant on the market. The guy on the left, I know for sure.
Were you going to paint or stain or leave it natural to fade, or?
So I haven't got that far yet. Step one was just to get the fence going, just because I know that I'll need that with dog. I do know that I do want to re-tin the place. It's got 10 on it now. But I just want to take that 10 off and put the same 10 back on it. The porch is falling down as far as like a railing and stuff, and that's cedar. Replace it with cedar. That's what I want to do. I don't necessarily have my mindset on anything other than I need to get some sort of fence.
And just let me ask on the front, I've been over there a couple of times, and I think the spirit of the rule for the city in general is we want to be able to see these historic old houses, and there's a lot of variety. But the way you've got it here, it's quite clear that you see the house and you see the barn, and you're just trying to get a little privacy on the sides. So in other words, this is a whole lot different than a fence coming across the whole front. Because as I look at it coming down the street, you're still seeing the house and you're seeing the barn. If privacy is really important to you, that's something we need to discuss. If you need a solid fence on those areas, you've got it. Not everybody wants a picket fence. But I guess what I'm asking is, how important is the privacy solid fence in front where you've got it?
Not required.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know if you were trying to, if you're gonna have things that you were trying to block, keep it from being seen.
No,
Yeah.
no, not necessarily at all. I mean, it's just, I live in Bolton now, there's nothing but privacy fences.
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah, they're
You know,
very common. Yeah.
That's all you see.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just the first thing that comes to mind when I think of securing it all, or the privacy fence, just because it doesn't leave any holes.
Yeah.
Right. There's nowhere to live this game. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
So if you're gonna move in and, do some updates or whatever, and, you purchased it from your grandparents, I think the house now, is it cedar siding or?
It is all wood.
Yeah, and so, you've got a natural, historical look to that house, with the red and white trim around the windows and, the shutters and everything. So, do you plan on changing any of that, or what do you want to do? Because that may tell us more about where you're headed with your fence.
I think that I definitely need to do something with the windows just to be more energy efficient. Because right now it is very single family, it's no sort of insulation stuff. But I don't want to change to me, it's historic, it's rustic, I don't want to change that. When my grandparents owned it as a kid, I lived there as well. And they always had the black and gold in the front, always had the big rocks, and the Texas sign over the garage, and all that. I don't want to change that. I'm not trying to make it look like Walden.
Yeah.
I just want to make it more functional for me and my kids.
It looks like, it could be, with the work that you're talking about on the property itself, I mean, it could be it has the potential to be a showplace in town. I mean, it really does.
Yeah.
So,
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
I see that the garage is there, and you want to keep that garage, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then, so you want to do you're talking a privacy fence right now currently, because that's the language we're using right now. So behind the garage because the house sits here, and let's just say the garage sits 3 feet in front of it, okay, just for giggles. And then, so you want to put a privacy fence 3 foot in front of your fence, level with the back of the garage. And then you want it to come up and angle to the corner of the house, so that when you drive up in your driveway or someone drives by, you can't see into your backyard past the garage. So you've got a blockage from the garage, a blockage with a privacy fence, and then say the area that you're going to walk up the steps from the garage to the front porch of your nice home, that's going to be privacy. That's what you have written right here, right now.
Yes.
And then from if I'm on the front porch, from the right side over, that's a privacy fence, and that's what you're asking for. Personally, it's a beautiful piece of property. I don't see the need for a privacy fence there, but that's, I don't see the need for it. I see the need for a fence because you have a dog, you want to keep your children from going out into the street. I do see that need. And you did say whatever it would take. So are you open to what we have as a 4-foot fence in the front of your home in the historical district. That being a safe, secure one, which would be maybe a 4-foot privacy type fence.
Or is 5 foot enough?
Well, 4 foot is the historical size in our ordinances.
So, I mean, I'm definitely open to that. I will say I have no large dog.
That's what I was wondering, yeah.
She is about 125 pounds.
Yep.
And she is, you know, probably this long, and when she jumps up on me, I mean, she's definitely like me. But something that I was also gonna just say is, I didn't really have my heart set where I was talking about having a fence.
Okay,
You know, I was also open, what if the fence was more on the back side of the house?
Yeah.
So it left everything open in the front like it is.
Yeah.
And then I literally just boxed in the backyard from the back of the house.
I would vote yes on that, 6 foot
Right.
tall today. If that's what you were.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely,
And
that would
also,
definitely work. for me.
also, how many generations of your family now?
Yeah,
I mean, we're
That's-
counting 3 so far, right?
That's been in that house, yes,
Yeah.
ma'am, record.
I mean, everyone drives by there because there used to be things on the front of it and decoration. We used to drive real slow by it. When we
Love
used to
that.
walk our dog, I was like, man, check it out. So when this first came, I think I was the first person to go, no, I would not like that. But because you want to keep your children safe and off the road, but you also want your beautiful historical home to be looked at, because people are going to walk and look at those homes. That's a given.
They do now.
They do
I
now.
do.
You drive by,
Everybody drives by.
It's a lovely
So-
place to drive.
Yeah, and I think we all agree, the size of the back, we understand, especially because you've got so much elevation on the,
Yes.
on the left side, looking at the house, they are real high, so you want to have that feeling of a privacy, because you're looking down on the other side, same thing eventually. Are you gonna use a rock board, but probably a rock board on the bottom?
Yes.
So it's gonna be good quality, you know, because that adds a little bit of height too. I mean, I'm just saying, technically, we're not gonna come out there and measure every inch. But, you know, 6 foot with a rock board is what we're seeing throughout the town.
So you said there's privacy fence now that's secure or no?
On the backside, it is.
And is it secure enough for you to begin, or are you tearing everything down and getting
No,
after it?
I think I could leave that for
Okay.
a while.
And how tall is it currently? Is it a 6 foot?
It is a 6 foot.
And on either side of you, what was there before? Is it
So
6 or 8 or?
the left side, it looks to be a 6 foot fence.
Yes.
The other side, the wire, it's probably
Oh.
like 4 maybe.
Yeah,
maybe
that's
5
just,
feet. I don't know.
okay. My biggest concern about the whole thing was covering up the front of that house. I was like, why? Because I was like, are they making it a compound? I'm like, it's
No,
beautiful.
when I was looking at the drawing, I'm like, okay, would it look weird if the fence was all the way in the back? You know, because as I drive home and I'm on the street now, it's like, no, because everybody has their fence way up, you know? So in my head, I was thinking that's where I need the fence, but the more and more I thought about it, no, I think if I did put it on just the backside, it would do this.
Well, Justin, you have a piece of property that obviously several of us like your property.
Yes.
So, you know, I mean, we're all just saying, you know, we want you, we wish you the best, and, you know, we want you to do something that's gonna help. I don't like to get in the way of a man's decision on his own property. But it sounds like you're headed in the right direction. So,
Dave, the ordinance for historical district is 4 foot fence, and it doesn't need to be it cannot be cyclone. Is that correct?
If it's in the front yard.
In the front yard?
Now,
So that's the only question was,
right, you know, and to me, so with the discussion on, you know, moving to the back, you know, part of the house, I wouldn't, you know, even though it's the first fence you would come to if you were entering the property, to me, that doesn't sound like a front yard fence, if
Yes.
you will, when it's back on the, you know, the rear corners of the home. To me, you're no longer in the front yard.
I agree.
So,
That was my only concern was, oh my God, not the front of that beautiful home. And so are you opposed to just 6 foot or with a rock bottom or a solid piece of wood on the bottom that would possibly make it taller? do you want 8 foot or do you want 6? And do you want to give us a new drawing?
I think 6 foot with the board on the bottom.
Is that what you would like?
Yes, ma'am.
Dave, does he have to submit a new drawing to show
I
us? or
think you can
we-
amend your motion exactly how you want to say it. If you want to say, the fence, doesn't, or, the fence starts on the back corners of the house and moves, to the rear of the property, I would probably, approve, if we're going to alter the heights at all, I would probably just approve a 6.5 foot fence because that accommodates a 6-inch rock board and a 6 foot picket. And that way it can just be a standard height all the way around. And, but I think
Completely
if,
abandon anything across the front. is
right,
what it-
Is that
right.
what we're hearing you say?
Yeah.
Are we
Is that
talking you
right?
into something or are you okay?
Fence on the back, on the very back of the house, straight off and it boxed in.
And that's, you're good with that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Since we're all in the same room.
We can look now.
We're talking about, coming off the back of the house. Where it came.
You got a back porch on there? I never have.
So this is
Okay.
the middle of the house. So
It actually wraps around all the way.
Oh, sweet.
And you can always do the pickets later if you wanted it.
You guys
But
believe
then you
that
still have
the thing that we're
Yes.
talking about there, those guys there.
The brick oven is
And
fine.
that will match the other, it's the same 6 foot solid.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And the reason I mentioned Rob Ward is as I walk down College Street and
I
over
call
on
them-
Caroline, there's a number of stockade 6 foot fences with rock board. So the reality, in the real world, they're really 6.5. Yeah. We're not gonna quibble about 2 inches. It just depends on the terrain, it's a slope to it.
When would you like to start? Are you getting close to being here in downtown Montgomery?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good.
Yes, ma'am. I'm gonna say 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Oh, good. And then the dog comes after it's completely empty. Sounds like a big
She's gonna
dog.
love it, because right now she's just running, a backyard in a city, cookie cutter neighborhood.
Yeah.
And now she will.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Yeah. That's a beautiful piece of property. I drive by it, I walk by it and I go, man, it's a cool house.
Well, I move to approve the wood privacy fence for 825 College Street in the Historic Preservation District, beginning with the back side of the house to the rear of the property line
Second.
and down the sides.
What's the second input?
6 foot with a 6-inch rock board.
I second that.
We have a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a face to come. Talk about, open to, and then
Fill in the
Yeah,
blanks. don't we?
absolutely.
one day we will learn.
Yeah, we all have to remind.
Thank
ourselves.
you. Take care.
Thank you, guys. Okay.
He just wanted a fence. And he didn't know, he just wanted to put something in so he could start a fence and he had no idea. Had he come to the first meeting, we already had a fence and a dog, we named it.
Okay, item number 4 on the agenda, planning and zoning overview and training regarding land use and zoning.
So, members of the commission, what I've have mentioned before is trying to introduce where the agenda allows short kind of either an overview or a training session on various topics. I had planned on a speaker being here. She was sick last week, so her schedule just wouldn't allow her to be here. She's a very, very well-known and very accomplished attorney in the state with respect to planning. She just so happened to be one of the attorneys working on the Buffalo Springs plan development back, 15 years ago. So she's going to, I spoke with her on Friday, and we had talked about a joint session between City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission, with one of the topics specifically being that plan development, and, what are the implications on that. So I may look to bring her back in when we have that. But tonight, you just get me. So,
So she was hired by Philip Lefebvre and
right. She was with a firm called Olson and Olson at the time, which was just kind of a municipal attorney. And they, one of the things they specialized in was development law. And so that's where she spent a good bit of her time. She works for the city of Houston now as an attorney, but again, she's been involved, kind of in the Texas, planning world for a number of years.
so she'll be very, that's the word. She will know the history on that master plan.
Right, she can, be able, a lot of water under the bridge between now and when she, worked on it, but at the same time, she's, that familiar with those agreements in general, and will be able to, to look back, specifically at that and talk to us about, details of why, something may have been agreed to or inserted into that agreement that we're kind of scratching our heads with now, but it may make sense in the context of, well, at the time, this was why that, language ended up in that document.
And if you could just touch on that for all of us, just briefly, because what, 2 or 3 years down the road, we're looking at maybe a good time for us. We've talked about having some workshop with city council, it really gearing towards basically lot sizes, homes and density, and then, I know there's been some discussion.
Right, there's
The timing on that.
right. And again, so there are 3 separate agreements. There's really one that matters for our purposes with the plan development. The other 2 are Chapter 380 agreements, which is ways that developers get reimbursed for certain costs, usually related to infrastructure or sales tax. So there's a couple agreements that go along with some of the infrastructure that was around Lonsdale Parkway. But the 2004 agreement, which expires in 2024, is the main development agreement. I'll be candid with you. I don't know the exact implications of what happens when that when the development agreement expires. My understanding, the overlay district, that is the plan development. So when we look at our zoning map and we see the big, kind of turquoise spot that's, all of Buffalo Springs, that does not go away. That's an overlay district, just like any other zoning district in the city, except that it lays on top of old zoning, layers. But when the development agreement expires, the plan development is still there. It means he has to do things a little bit differently in terms of what ordinances he follows or something like that. But for the land use plan, or what's called the general plan, is still the same. His regulations in terms of what he can do where is still the same. Again, the big piece of the agreement that he will be sad to see go when it expires is right now everything he does is locked into the 2004 ordinances that we had on the time when the agreement was adopted. We've really not adopted that many meaningful development regulations since then. So I don't have.
I will point out that Dave has done a great job of cleaning up a lot of the old zoning. There's a lot of gray area, and that was a huge undertaking over the last 2 years. Just wanted to mention.
Yep. So, but with the topics tonight, so what I did, I would like to pull. So I pulled out the plan development, session for tonight because again, I'm probably not the most well versed to give. But what I thought I'd do was give, one, just kind of a, what's in P&Z's lane, just kind of a brief overview of zoning. And then secondly, kind of talk a little bit about the historical district, talk about those, the design guidelines, and tell you guys where I messed up last week. So with that, I'm going to flip over to slide 3. And again, I built this presentation planning for a Zoom meeting. And now I don't get a Zoom meeting, so now we're dealing with the handouts. Brief overview of zoning. Where it's important for us in 1994 is when the city adopted its zoning ordinance. And then in 2008, the city established a historic preservation district. So what's in a zoning ordinance is very, very specifically granted by the state. Chapter 211 of the Texas Local Government Code is the chapter on zoning. And it essentially, the way state laws are written is if the state doesn't tell you that you can specifically do it, you can't. And they're very, very clear about, saying these are the things that you can control with zoning. If we flip over to the next slide, there's a handful of things that go along with the city being able to have zoning. The first and foremost, it has to be based off a comprehensive plan. A city has to have a comprehensive plan and so in essence, the comprehensive plan is really the guiding document of the city. Zoning is just a tool in that toolbox. But the state says, if you're going to start telling people what they can do on property and where they can do it, and when they can do it, you need an overall plan. You need a comprehensive plan, because if you don't have that, we're not sure you've thought through it enough to start telling people what they can do with their property. So again, another point, and this is cities in general, but even zoning, everything that a political subdivision like a city has the authority to do is going to be based on one of three things: health, safety, or welfare of the general population. Everything that a city does is, from zoning ordinances to building codes to police powers, is all based on those three things. So in general, when we start looking at, could we do this or could we do that? One of the first questions that we want to ask is, how does it impact those, the health, safety, and welfare? Does it improve conditions in any one of those three things? Obviously, zoning allows for districts, because that's what we've got. We've got single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial. And again, like I mentioned, there are, limitations on what cities can regulate. Those are granted explicitly by the state. Some examples, most examples are on the next page. It's typical zoning regulations. The heights of buildings, the number of stories. Where zoning really got its first start was in 1916 in New York City. There was I think it was called the Triangle Fire Factory. And there was a seamstress shop, or kind of I guess a textile shop, where this was back in the early 20th century. When all the workers came in, they locked the doors because they don't want anybody to leave unauthorized during the day. Now, if a fire breaks out inside of a warehouse and there's only a handful of ways in or out, and those are chained, you can imagine the catastrophe. And so I forget how many number of women died in the fire, but that was the impetus, because again it went back to health, safety, and welfare, and that's where cities said we can tell you what you can build and where, because it very much then starts to speak to density. How close can we build? In a town like this, we don't think about overcrowding in quite the same way that a very urbanized core might. Again, where but the number one goal there is the safety and welfare of the folks that are in that district. So again, that's why cities have the authority to say, well, you can only build a certain size building. There's so many stories. Yard sizes, we see that when we're talking about our subdivision plats. Typically nowadays, because of the size of lot that the city says this is our minimum lot size, as you are all familiar with, we get a plat for a new subdivision and we say, hey, we'd like a variance on the front yard or the side yard or the backyard. And the reason that comes to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a recommendation to council is because, again, that's one of the very specific things that the state says, yes, you can control that through zoning. And then the last one there, obviously, can tell us where, the areas of importance are to your town, with respect to history and culture, which is why we have our historical district. I feel like I've blazed through that. Do you guys have any just basic, questions on zoning in general? Anything I can answer or talk about? Just, general zoning questions?
Are we planning on any other, gathering any more historical sites inside of Montgomery?
That's probably, my own sense is that the city's open to it. I, feel like in terms of a landmark, which, we can go and kind of bleed over into the historic district talk, because there's the historic district and then there's historic landmarks.
Okay,
And you find some landmarks inside the district, but then there's some that don't have to be inside that district, like the China Chapel, over on 149. It's a historic landmark or, a historic site, but not inside the district. The city certainly could. The more, I think if we found out that there was a site somewhere that, had a lot of significance that, we somehow, we just didn't know about, we could say, hey, that's now to do that, the very best way to do that is to have owner agreement.
Yeah.
It would be an uphill battle if they didn't want to, but again, when we adopted the historic ordinance in 2008, when I saw a packed meeting. I was chair of the planning and zoning at the time, and this room was full. There were people in the lobby, and there was a guy that I won't mention his name, but I will never forget that he said, if you guys are going to adopt this historic district, next thing you know, you're going to be coming for my guns and you can cry out for my cold dead hands. And nobody's coming for your guns, nobody's coming for your property. Now, we see again, a dozen years on, that the historic district was actually a very good thing. It didn't turn into this, very overbearing, cities and everybody's business. Has, in my opinion, it has helped to sustain the values of a lot of the homes in there, because you do have the protections that you don't have, when you don't have an HOA. Because, an area like our historic district is really never going to have an HOA. It's not a platted subdivision, and you're never going to get all those people to agree to, to self-governance in a sense. And, like the subdivisions, that you live in and I live in, it's a subdivision, but there's no active HOA. We're not, so in my mind, the historic district has served a very, very, critical role in, the core of our town. And I think it'd be hard to make a case how it's somehow hurt, something in the city. So, yeah, I think we did good work. It was very, very tough to get through.
People in the woodlands always know this by this. I mean, we would just be Montgomery, but they know the historic part.
Right, and for a city that, is very, very, proud of its heritage, it would be tough to think about, being very proud of, your history without some type of a protection for the core area that you say, here's where, a lot of that history happened and is still standing today.
It makes it difficult for outside entities to steamroll over the town of Montgomery as well.
Right.
So.
Really, I think a good example. So 2 years ago in the legislature, they took away the ability for cities to regulate building materials. So we used to have this corridor enhancement ordinance that protected, the main corridors in town, so you couldn't do, anything that was, like a metal building or something like that on the corridors. The legislature took that away and said, if it's an approved building in the International Building Code, it's fine to use. So cities lost the power to regulate any building materials except in historic districts. So you guys now are the only ones in the city that can, regulate what the exterior of a building, looks like. There's nothing, I think they tried at the legislature this year to kind of roll back some of that so we could get, a little more control over what gets built on 105 or 149, but it didn't go anywhere. But again, to the importance of the role that, that a zoning commission has is, right now, this is the only time that any city in Texas can regulate its materials is in a historic district. So.
I have two more questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know, it's full questions. Is there any zoning papers or ordinances or whatever that's left undone that hasn't been finalized or that's been presented, but it's just kind of been shoved aside? Is there anything that as a planning and zoning commission that we can look at, that maybe we can finalize or perfect or
Are you
sharpen the
asking for my
corners?
list? Because I've got a list.
I'm just wondering if there's something, because, I mean, it seems like we're fairly new to
Right.
the planning and zoning, and we're only on it for 2 years, and the next
And
people
you
coming
can
in.
always, if you're willing to serve in 2 years, we're gonna rope you into a reappointment.
You're right. But you see what I'm saying, though, is, you know, for the newbies, or if there's something that maybe we can go over that it makes our job a little bit easier,
Absolutely.
you know, I was interested in that. And my second question is, is there current zoning for that auto zone? Is it gonna look like an auto zone that's,
What I was just
everywhere else?
talking about, yes.
I mean, can we talk about this?
You know, 2 years ago, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I don't know what,
You know, so 2 years ago, we would have, seen those cinder block, walls. So when we adopted our corridor enhancement ordinance, we called it, kind of, the working title was the O'Reilly's ordinance. We wanted something that didn't look like the O'Reilly's building. We said, wow, this is going to be, now it had been here long before the corridor enhancement ordinance, but that's what, we would point to and say, that's what we don't want. And then right next door to that, when the little, the nail shop and the strip center there in between McDonald's, when they opened up, or when they started construction, they started, with the exterior block, kind of and it's not a terrible looking block, but it's a utilitarian looking block. It looks better than plain cinder block, but only by a hair. But 2 years ago, we could have told them, no, here's the approved list. But since it's not in a historic district, we just have to let them go with what they, want to do.
so you're telling me that when HED comes, or Home Depot, or Lowe's, they can just,
If they're not in the historic.
right,
Right,
so
yeah,
our
yeah.
town is not, we
We
just,
could not tell
just
them.
knocked down all those beautiful trees, and then,
Right. We
because
could-
when they built Birch Brothers and took that house out of there and took down those 2 beautiful trees, I thought I just started crying. I was driving by going, what are they doing?
Yeah.
But, and now Birch Brothers, I mean, that parking lot's a little bit fuller, but
a whole lot of-
there's places of business, that strip mall it's empty,
Right,
opposed to what used to be when, it's
right.
a strip mall, let's get everything in there, and now it's not very
They're
full.
struggling, right.
Now, instead of beautiful trees, we have cement, but anyways.
So one of the things that,
Church, yeah.
so one of the tools that in my mind that a city still has in its toolbox when it comes to building materials is an example, would be just across, Buffalo Springs Drive from where the AutoZone is getting built, where you start to run into Starbucks and, what's called the shops of
Panda
Montgomery.
Express is
There,
coming.
all of those, that developer has very, very tight deed restrictions on, what they will allow into their development. The AutoZone lot was bought from the McCoys, folks,
Oh, thank you,
was
Mr.
who owned that. And so they had to follow so they probably are, sitting there scratching their heads. It's like, well, why did we have to do a brick building, on the front, but these guys can just do whatever they want. And it was, just a matter of timing. But one of the best tools that a city has, in my mind, and that's where these, again, I mentioned them earlier, a Chapter 380 agreement or a development agreement, with the developer. I find it perfectly acceptable to say, it is important to us the way that your architecture looks. We're willing to help with the cost of that. If we can't just say you have to do it, our next, to me, the next, question then is, well, can I, make them want to do it? And whether it's, a tax abatement of some sort, to me, with the developer, to be able to get a developer to write in the covenants and deed restrictions that they need to then go to the individual businesses to say, so the footing that we're on right now, which is kind of, really my default footing, is a partnership with those developers and not kind of an us against them thing, because that only works as long as there's rules.
So the partnership is between the city engineer or
Would
city
be the city
administrator?
itself, and the
City
developers.
council, mayor?
Right,
Is that what we're talking
ultimately the
about?
council, right,
And
yeah.
MEDC and so,
Right,
okay.
for the city to say, hey, you're coming in and you're gonna have a big visual impact on our city.
Okay.
We want it to look nice. What will it take to get you to do that? Are you willing to do that on your own? Because you should, because, we can make an economic case that, your rents are going to be, more to your liking if you have a higher quality development. You're gonna be able to charge more, you're gonna get nicer tenants. If it takes a little bit of, helping to move the needle a little bit, well, can we, it looks like, you were going to build X, but to build Y, it looks like it's going to be about another $30,000 more. Can we come up with a financial incentive that will help you get there, that, meets the city's goals and meets the developer's goals? So, but again, those are they're on a case by case basis.
Have you done
now.
one yet?
We have not. We're, fortunate. Most of the commercial development outside of AutoZone is in the shops. And again, or back to the plan development. One of the things that the plan development also has is architectural control. So anything that's built there, they do have some limitation. They've got a little bit of limitations. They don't just have a blank check in what they can approve and not, but they've got pretty rigorous architectural standards inside the plan development that they would have to meet. But again, those are attached to the property via, the title to the property or the deed restrictions and the covenants, not by an ordinance from the city that says this property is subject to it. So,
And let me just add in there that they've also done, in the last couple of years, quite a bit on the tree ordinance.
yes, I was just asking about that.
Sometimes a lot has been taken down, whether they have to replace with a certain percentage. But there's different formulas, and we came up with one that was really more realistic, I think. But that brings up a good point. If you want to try that image of working with developers, you want a good working relationship, because really, when you think about it, it's in their best interest to do a quality job that looks good. It just helps their business. So, and we have found a lot of these businesses, entities that come in that have, I don't want to say chain, but that they really know how to do it because they've been doing it for a while. And they usually have like Starbucks, but they've got it.
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And so, hey, great. And the numbers have been awesome when they show us the reports on tax revenues. Because let's face it, we're going to grow. And like the new lawyer said, get on board, because if you fight the growth, you hurt everything. You got to stay ahead of it with your infrastructure and everything else. And so my point simply is, trying to stay ahead of it and do a quality job. Because if you don't stay ahead of it, then you're always trying to catch up, and it costs you 2 or 3 times more money for the city. So that's what Dave's trying. That's what he's trying to do.
there's, almost every decision I make, I feel like is a generational one, right? Which is a lot of weight. So, the decisions that we make today are going to take 25 to 30 years to be able to change. So everything that we look at is, and in some cases longer, when you deal with a neighborhood, the houses, there may be a handful of houses that get, knocked down or rebuilt or remodeled. But, once you plat a subdivision, I mean, they don't really change those.
That's
You
why
know.
I bring up precedent.
Yeah.
Is this the precedent?
Yep.
Yep.
And so are the boundaries of the historical district pretty much set?
They
Or does
can
the
be
city
amended.
anticipate any additional?
I don't know that there's been any, talk recently of making it bigger. That's more than just a conversation of, more than, a couple people saying, hey, it would make sense if we looked at, enlarging this to, to include these other areas or something like that. But, we sure can. Zoning changes, no matter if it's a variance to a zoning ordinance, or because you're effectively changing the ordinance when you provide a variance, or if you're actually changing the text of a zoning ordinance itself. But because zoning has so much power over property, because we can tell people what they can build, where they can build it, how many people can live there.
And where the growth is going.
Yep, there's a very high bar for changing that. You have to do more notification, and you have to provide more opportunity for public input when you change a zoning ordinance than any other type. So you can do it. It's, anytime you change an ordinance that is, or a part of a zoning ordinance, you want to be real sure, because again, it's a longer process, and it's, takes a while to change, and then the same amount of time to undo if you realize, oh, shoot, you should have done that instead. So there, certainly, I think we're probably, my own sense is we're probably reaching a time where, an expansion of the historical district, would probably, get some traction. Again, because I think, the first time it was really tough, nobody, there was just a lot of unknown questions, and certainly I could understand them of, people felt like they were going to lose somehow the control of their property, or what they could do with their property. But in actuality, they really didn't give anything up. It was, to the point that someone said earlier, it was more about protecting us from folks coming in than trying to, protect us, from each other. It was more about the development pressures, from the outside. And so where I messed up last time, and just to touch on that, I said last time, a couple times, really emphatically, that the design guidelines were not adopted. They are. I learned that.
I was gonna call you on that. And I
Yes.
thought, that's not my.
They absolutely are. When you look on Unicode, which is who hosts our ordinances online, you don't find those design guidelines anywhere. But if you know kind of how to click through the actual documents, which I only figure out after trying it, wrong a few times, but then I can finally get back to the ordinance. And I finally got back to the original ordinance in the way that it was adopted. And at the back of that, sure enough, there's those design guidelines. Why they're not front and center when you first open up the zoning ordinance makes no sense to me. I think that they seem like a pretty important thing that should be, easy to be found on Unicode. But those actually, the copy, I think I attached, the design guidelines to y'all's packet. And so those are absolutely a part of, I don't know where I got the notion that they weren't adopted, that I felt like was confirmed when I started looking at our ordinances hosted online. And I was like, what a missed opportunity. Why didn't we do that? I guess it must have been too much, work back then. And we pulled the plug too early. Totally wrong. My apologies. It was a lesson learned for me, and to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. So I'm sorry that I steered you guys wrong on that. So,
Well, thank you. There's a lot of material out there, so I keep track of all of it. And, it's like, we love the history here, we love all that. So please don't take out of context when I say things like, there is an eclectic mix. There's going to always be a mix. What are we going to do to save the two donkeys from ever going away? We want to make sure those donkeys stay in town.
right.
I'm clever.
So,
But seriously, to go along with what the lawyer said, people see it, they love it, they come here, they want to move here. They don't look into the infrastructure. They just assume you're going to have sewer, you're going to have water. They don't care. They don't. So that's where it's so important with the engineering. And as we move forward, we really realize how important it is to stay ahead. Because there will be growth. That's just the way it is.
right.
That's the American way. Other people don't.
And you're talking about the eclectic nature of the town.
Yes.
When you have a town go with the Texas flag emblazoned on it, I think that pretty much puts the message out there that we embrace
Yeah.
that. So, that the community of town has embraced that.
Mm-hmm.
So
And you're right.
monkeys and
Yes.
goats and
Unique
eclectic people and
because it has become such a mix. And also, don't get me wrong when I say there's two sides to this thing, and you don't want to be, when I say we don't want to be overly restrictive, it's only because I look around and I see, it's kind of ironic. We talk about, we want to be historic, but back in those old days, they really didn't have many regulations. I mean, it was kind of like do your own thing. So, you know, we have this mindset now that we have landscapers and perfect little lawns, and that's not what this is all. That's why we like the variety. And I'm not saying you want to keep the place up, but let's over at the Donkeys, a couple of those sheds are falling apart, but that doesn't look. It kind of looks right, you know. I mean, it's that little side street where there's a hole in the roof, and so.
Don't think that.
I think the key to, you know, historical context is craftsmanship, Jeff. You know, whether it's modern craftsmanship that stands the test of time, and can be translated into the history of you know, the architectural nature of the history of a town. It's craftsmanship that's the bottom line. So
materials that last and gonna look good.
yeah, I'm from the hill country. You know, I mean, you go from German to Spanish to, you know, all different kinds of architecture. And nobody cares what direction the rocks lay, as long as the rocks lay, you know, nicely.
Yeah.
So, you know,
it's kind of like we're seeing more of these hard wire, heavy duty galvanized wire fences with a 4x4 treated post. To me, at first I was like, whoa, but think about it, that's going to look good 20 years down the road because it doesn't rust, it doesn't fall apart like a stockade thing. So in a certain area, that's not a bad thing.
I actually favor that over a 6 or 8 foot privacy fence because handling claims and whatnot, those things fall, you get a 50-mile-an-hour gust of wind and those things start falling like cards. You know, you take a card deck and just, you know, they just drop. I mean, and then you have, you know, that's why I asked, are you doing what? Is this for livestock or is this for dogs, or is it for privacy for your children and your family? Because, you know, this town has livestock in backyards at certain places. And that's part of the eclectic nature that you're talking about. But we have to have that precedent that, you know, are we setting a precedent if that fence goes down and that those animals get out, you know? So the craftsmanship, that's what it boils down to. You know, I think one of our board members said last week, you know, we have this wide parameters for fences. This guy gets this fence in his favor, this variance, and the next guy gets a different fence in his, you know, where is our foundation? What are we doing about fences? And so in that conversation moving forward in a couple of years, I truly believe that we need to address how to bridge the gap between the fencing so that we're not, you know, we don't want to head in the wrong direction. We want to head in the correct direction for the community. Because the reason we're here is to assist the community. So, but we want quality craftsmanship, you know, in that.
Well, to go on with what you're saying, another thing that might come up in the future is, you know, sometimes we use the term grandfathering or something. That could be a tough road. And that, you know, today I walked around and I think we've got 4 homes within this college in Carolina, chain link fences. And
The bear, they're not supposed to be chain link fences in that area.
But to me, you know, it might be better leave it alone. I don't think there's many people that want to put them in now.
Well, look at City of Tomball. City of Tomball said, you know, that there's mobile homes, there's manufactured homes in the city limits. But whenever those reach the point of being replaced, you can't go back with a mobile home in city limits.
That's what the way to go.
But do we have that? Do we have that written somewhere? Is when your cyclone falls down, you have to.
Read you the right way.
Right.
Do we have that written somewhere?
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
So when it talks about, the fences would be, because, to replace it with a new one, it's unfortunate, there's one on Pond that showed up, recently that was next to the other one.
Mhm.
I was on council at the time and didn't get a good answer on why that didn't get
I'm sorry, after it happened.
it right.
I'm
And
sorry, after it happened.
right. And so when it comes to homes, to talk a little bit about grandfathering in homes, the ordinance does, prescribe a very specific, if you're going to change more than, say, I think the number is 25%, but if you make major renovations to the exterior of a structure, so if you're changing more than 25%, I think it is, of the facade, you do have to bring the structure into compliance with the historic district. Say one wall was hot pink, and if it was there before, it's fine. But then they decide, well, we're going to repaint, this wall of the house, white. Well, that just meant you now have to bring the whole structure into compliance. To your point earlier about, some of the things that are there, kind of those undone projects or things. I think there's some that are on the books now that could certainly be, made better. 2 or 3 of those. One would be the design guidelines, for the historic district. I think we could take another look at those. Again, it's a longer and harder one to change, but I think it's worth doing. In the slide there on one of the slides, the parameters for your historic home, if you're going to build a historic home, and the design guidelines are written specifically for the concept of building new structures. If you have read through those, it's really written in a way that contemplates somebody coming in to build a new structure. They're not really written so much for somebody, looking to repaint their house, or that stuff's addressed in there, but this is really talking about, new structures. It promotes styles between 1830 and 1941, which is a heck of a window. And I understand, having that. One of the things that I felt like was missing at the time, and I still feel like is missing, is a location. Because so I can build a Bauhaus style, out of 1930s, Germany, kind of postmodern, under the way the design guidelines are written, I can build that right over there. And now it may not conform with the whole district, but I feel like we should say, where the design guideline, or where do we want these buildings to look like? To me, architecture is, very much a local thing. So, whether it's, in the state of Texas or in, the general, Montgomery region or something. But again, I think there's some latitudes, things to be tightened up. I also think that we probably could make them, those guidelines, more applicable to things like fences and paint colors and that type of thing that right now they're mentioned in there, but they're really mentioned in the context of somebody who's built a new house or a new business. Another area that we could probably look at is what's called our table of permitted uses in the zoning ordinance. That thing is as outdated as just about any of our ordinances. And we want to, what a table of uses is, about 250 business types that say they can go in, do they go in industrial, do they go in institutional, do they go in commercial? But some of the businesses are almost comical now because, again, they were businesses that were a real thing 30 or 40 years ago. Those businesses just don't exist now. Newspaper stands, things like that, that just aren't, and likewise, there's types of businesses now that there weren't 30 or 40 years ago, so, being able to look at that. And lastly, looking at a new type of a commercial zoning district. We've kicked around the idea for several years.
Oh, what? Say it again, a what?
A new type of commercial zoning district. So right now we've got, B commercial is our commercial, zoning type. That's good whether you're in downtown or on 105. And to me, I think we could, start to articulate, these are the types of businesses that we're fine with in downtown. But while a gas station on the corner of 105 is perfectly appropriate, probably not what we want to build in the middle of downtown. Not that someone would, but that's the type of thing, whether it's either like a historic business district or something, more generic, but that's what we go to more of a neighborhood scale commercial than something that's appropriate again for 105 frontage. So those are a handful of ideas about, again, things that are on my list to one day improve upon.
I have 3 more questions.
Mhm.
The garbage cans, nothing, absolutely nothing has happened. They're still sitting where they were. And the Cozy Greats trash can is where it's at. They put a generator in there. It's not moved. I made a suggestion, I think, twice, let the city, build around that garbage can over there by the community center, set precedents, give an example. Somebody reach out to, the trash people, how they feel about that. Some of those can or can't be moved. But it's fixing to get busy downtown because I've seen that the ice cream truck is being worked on. So possibly, I'll be able to walk down and get an ice cream real soon. I mean, I've been waiting. I need some ice cream.
Very slow.
Yeah, but I see some movement. So that means that trash can is going to be there, right? And then the Cozy Grapes is, and then you've got the trash can from the ice cream. So am I supposed to ask for that to be put on the agenda again, or how does that come up again?
Yeah, let me just add to that. One day I ran into Tom Cronin. I did ask him generally, I just said, and just so I have the history right, was it that he moved it because of the where he put the generator, he had to move it down. But I got the impression that was temporary.
Yes, I got the impression it was temporary as well.
Right.
It's not, because the generator is perfect,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, well, he has to figure out.
And
Have you
I
done
get
anything?
it.
Nothing else has come out of that? And again, we talked about this extensively before,
Yeah.
and we can't really say a whole lot until we address it at the community center. And now, as a matter of fact, there's 2 new ones there, instead of 1, it's 2 youngsters.
Oh, I didn't see the second one. I was just there at the end.
2 small ones. They're
Oh.
actually smaller.
I wonder if they brought those in maybe for the Antiques Festival, that they're temporary, or
I hope so.
I'm not sure.
I'll have to look, I don't know. But they were actually, they were painted. They were like new.
Did anything ever come of the church versus Kaiser's?
I have not heard from them in a while. I hope they're all working together.
They're working together.
Making it
Yeah.
happen. I think there was.
There's trees planted
Ah,
on both people's property.
there we go.
And
That's
some
the best of
some sound barrier type of trees are arranged or going to be, that's where they're at right now.
The last time I was by there, they burned the brush piles that were piled up in the backfield.
right.
And now there's.
So,
Just give it back to Mother Nature. Let it grow.
No, they're not giving it back to Mother Nature.
Yeah.
Well,
It's well planned. I don't know how cattle are gonna roam in that area. Yeah.
One of the things I had spoken with them after the freeze, I'd spoken with Darla Weaver of the Cowboy Church. She said, we're thankful that we didn't clear all of our trees because we realized that we needed cover for our cattle. So they were able to stop clearing anymore. And they said, yeah, so it's, I think there was a bit of distrust on both sides.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was, to me, the role that I think that, if the city, was able to play, it was to focus on, don't focus on the finish line, focus on the next step. If you guys can take the next step together,
that was the whole point.
yeah.
Yes, we didn't need to be in the middle of that.
So thankfully, I've not heard anything, so I presume that everybody's happy enough to keep, taking that next step until they're.
There's more going on over in that area, but I don't know what needs to be brought to anybody's attention, but That's their business, right now until someone brings it up. Okay, so, that was the garbage. My number, the number 2 question was, Mr. Cheatham, when's he gonna start the building right there on 105?
I've not heard.
And the reason I bring that up is because the 2 majestic, beautiful trees, I brought up to city council before I was ever into planning and zoning, because I called, because I knew he was fixing to cut it down. He had already cut down one historical tree, in my opinion. And so I came to the city. So supposedly, if, when he builds the building, if it is not in a direct path that he can't go around or something, he has to leave the tree. From, now that's very loosely verbiage, but it's my understanding that if he built the building kind of like the one he has over here, you know, he has the trees out front, and if he has a circle drive going in, that he could quite possibly leave those 2 older trees. I'm just bringing it up to find out, to make sure someone's on top of it when he starts construction, that I don't drive down 105 and there's a tree gone.
I would almost guarantee he will take those trees.
I
down.
know he will, because I was there when the other one was cut. I would started crying. And don't think of a tree hugger.
You know, it's, you love these old trees.
You can't get them. You can't get those trees. They'll never, ever in my life come back.
And I'll tell you, we went through this when we did the medical plaza too, for the medical.
Yes,
And
yes.
those 2 beautiful, and we
Yes.
looked at that, and just so you know, we tried to look at, you know, could you do part of your parking lot with dirt? But there is when they're that big and there's that much root
Yes.
structure, you can't even get close to the building, or anything, because it will feel.
And I think that's what's gonna happen with those 2 trees. And it's going to be a massive, huge change in downtown. I understand he owns it and he's left the trees there that long, and I have appreciated, I have pictures of them. But I have the picture of the big tree that they knocked down for Berkshire Brothers parking lot too, and the house is set beside it. But anyways, I just wanted to ask to kind of stay on top of that. Do you happen to know?
I will urge and encourage him every way that I can.
Exactly. You know, and if there's a way, because we always try to remind people love trees, so, you know, it's it's your benefit if you can save it.
There's a tree limb right out there to the left that's sitting there because that tree wasn't cut down. That tree blew down, you know, but there's a tree limb right out there that Santa Ana surrendered under, apparently. So right up there.
You know, we were, because of the freeze, so much of the planters lost a lot of shrubbery, a lot of stuff that was big. And so anyway, we were looking at an evergreen that was very big, and they wanted thousands for it.
Yes.
Because, and so that may be a deter. If he's got to replace something, it would be much cheaper to leave what he's got.
Especially if he starts building right now, because they end up prices are up on trees. All right, I won't dwell on that. And number 3, and I will quit asking questions unless y'all say something curious. There is a peculiar van that strategically parks itself in several different locations in downtown Montgomery. And in my opinion, it's pretty provocative.
Oh, yes.
And I think it's for your nails, a place that does nails. So I walked around this past weekend to find where that nail salon is. I didn't see that nail salon.
Yeah, it's parked right there by the community center, in that.
Yeah, like randomly. And then over there by the wine
It
place.
reminds me of the sign that had to go through about the boat. It's the same look. Yeah.
Do you recall the number?
I was trying not to get too close and stare, and I'm driving. My question is, in the city, it's a regular,
On a vehicle is
Small van.
pretty much off.
so they can drive it and park it.
Do you remember me saying about when we were talking about, so the barbecue place, the guy could, you know, put vinyl wrap on his truck and advertise the heck out of
Oh,
his
kind of like Shooky
barbecue.
Donuts and all, okay.
Yeah,
I'm just asking because, man,
Yeah,
yeah.
But this is, we're talking about tastefully done versus not tastefully.
for sure. Yeah, that's the
that's,
you know,
that's in the eye of the beholder.
And I'm just asking, has anyone else seen the band or is it just me?
it's just like that sign that we turned down. It's very, buxom, slow cut. And it says, so it says right on it, something about sex.
Oh, it does for their nails?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a nail, but I would never go there to get my nails done. It's weird.
Sexy something. I feel like I feel like it was, I don't know if it was like a Yukon or a Suburban, but maybe that's the one I saw, but yeah, it was on the back, it was on the sides. And
It was
like,
there. It was
that's
for everyone to
I've never
see.
seen that here before.
Yeah,
It was on the road at the time, but
This one's sitting still in downtown Montgomery on a regular basis.
Probably won't last.
So anyways, that's,
Who's gonna go get the business to it?
that's my question.
That might be a man salon too,
Yeah.
I don't know, but.
kind of curious marketing strategy, I suppose, that they're doing, but.
I moved to a gen of the meeting. Can we adjourn? Yeah, not a gen. I don't want
Let's
to do any
adjourn.
more agendas. I moved to adjourn.
I don't have anything else on my.
Let me just say this, thank you, Dave, for this, and I just wanted to say a big thank you to Susan, Henry, and to you for getting us through with all the Zoom meetings and getting through the pandemic. Really, really, and I'm not just saying that, I mean, you had to really make some adjustments. There was a few glitches, but it worked out.
We are glad to be back in person.
Yeah.
I
can
noticed the
say-
sound the other night on council was
Yeah.
not that great.
Yep.
Do you know what that's about? Is that,
Not specifically, but I know the issue, and our AV guy is coming on Monday to see if, my sense is it's a combination of two things. I think we can make some minor adjustments with our mic settings and such. I think that's only going to carry us so far. A lot of what I heard was kind of an echoey almost, you can hear it in here. Sound panels on the walls to help, dampen some of the echo. I think we'll solve the rest of it. Once we get, we had also noticed when staff was, when we were watching the video, it seemed like the clarity of the video was lacking a bit. And we asked the AV guy and said, it's not the cameras, and I don't understand it, but when you try to send, or when we send our signal into Zoom, it somehow compresses the file stream or, whatever it does, but to get it in Zoom and broadcast, it's got to reduce some of the image quality. Once we drop Zoom and we're just live streaming on our own without Zoom, then we should have that, we should have the clarity. And again, the audio stuff, we're going to see how much we can adjust on Monday, but I would agree with you wholeheartedly. It's got to get better. And I know we can make it better. It's just a matter of, kind of ironing out the bugs.
And it's not just here, there's issues, they call it hybrid meeting, we're combining Zooming with the real. My wife is, the assistant's leading out and they're having the same problem, exact same problem. When somebody speaks, there's a crackling noise. It wasn't the council members here, it was if you're at the podium or zooming in. And there's an echo, and they just quit doing it because it was just a problem. But there may be some remedies to it too. But they call it a hybrid because you're combining two different things.
Right.
But the zooming has worked out great, and again, we appreciate it. All you have done. Absolutely, make it all happen. So we had our motion on the table for adjournment. We got a second?
second?
We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. The ayes have it.
That's just much easier than
Good. Nice to be back.
we're almost normal.
Yeah, we know who everybody is.